Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads.
9/11 is a day not forgotten. Its impact on the world left people scared and worried about the future. Like myself and others, our childhoods were in some way shaped by it. Culture shifted, politics was changed, and the world moved into a much darker outlook than what we had expected coming into the year 2000. And George W. Bush was at the forefront of it all. Everything about his presidency was drastically changed by that day. After rallying the country through its mourning, George W. Bush set a course for the country should rightfully retaliate, and to honor those who had perished in the tragedy. However, it prolonged and worsened tensions in the Middle East, establishing governments, countless troops on the ground, all to find the mastermind of it all. Back on US soil, Bush's missteps only worsened his approval. The No Child Left Behind Act, the Patriot Act, his response to Katrina, and ending it all with a recession which anchored the US economy. Plans change, and what you had planned has to have revisions in times of crisis. George W. Bush left office in 2009, and his legacy is remembered poorly. But while he is remembered as a wartime president, there's a part of history that often gets overlooked when studying the 43rd. His first 8 months. For a time, things seemed to be just fine for Bush during his settling in at the White House. What were his first policies like? And what was his public image like before the attack? With this analysis, we can take a look back at the presidency before a tragedy, and question just what would his presidency be like had there been no attack. This is what we'll discover now. This is Bush before 9/11.
I am honored and humbled to stand here where so many of America's leaders have come before me, and so many will follow. We have a place, all of us, in a long story, a story we continue, but whose end we will not see.
To understand Bush's viewpoints, we have to trail back and examine him from his earliest stint in politics. George W. Bush, born in 1946, is the eldest son of George H.W. Bush. George studied at Yale College, graduating in 1968 and graduating Harvard Business School in 1975. He was considered an average student by his teachers, and while during college, he had a job for the National Guard, which allowed him to become a pilot. While he had the credentials to become something more by his peers, it was hankered by his personal choices. George was known to be a mean drunk, and most saw him as a hothead, a term that would carry along with him in future events. During the mid-70s, eager to prove himself to the family name, Bush ran a first unsuccessful bid for the position of his home state of Texas at the U.S. House of Representatives back in 1977. His choice to throw his hat into the political arena was down to his views, not connecting with then President Jimmy Carter and his administration.
I made the announcement that we would have no Governor Reagan's or President Ford's or George Bush's or John Connolly's come in this district to campaign on my behalf. And I did so because I wanted the people to concentrate on the candidate, to realize that we can represent this district in Washington, D.C., and we do not need the help of people outside of West Texas campaigning for us.
Bush ran and failed against the Democratic frontrunner, Kent Hance. Hance, using the Bush's family name and heritage as a weakness, stated that George was unable to connect with regular Texans. It proved to work, and Bush had his first political defeat. After Ronald Reagan finished his second term in office with a booming economy and a successful foreign strategy, George Bush Sr., who was his VP at the time, ran for the Oval Office and won in a landslide. Bush Jr. was by his father's side all the way, being recruited by his father as a campaign manager for the initial run, and his 1992 re-election. However, the Bush name would see its biggest loss. During the re-election, as Bush Sr.'s time in office was not fondly looked at, it was just easy takings for his Democratic rival, former governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton.
92 defeat was really hard, and it ironically enough, it did make it easier for me, because when people criticized my dad, somebody who I admire greatly, I didn't react well at times, and it really affected me. When they criticized me, the sting wasn't nearly as difficult.
The Bush family name was left in a bad light, and Bush Jr., who was a strong defender for his father, sought to bring the name back into a positive light. And in 1994, George W. Bush once again ran for the governor position of the state of Texas, this time winning against the last Democrat to hold the position at the time of recording.
Ann Richards. 4 years ago, she won by winning Republican women. She couldn't hold them last night when the choice was a former Republican president's son. Today, the governor-elect had a message for Republicans in Washington.
Leave us alone. Let Texas run Texas.
His first term as the governor saw many positives for the state. Bush ran on the principle of accountability and personal morals that would play into his education policy reform, as well as his massive tax cuts, drawing division from his own party. The moves in office gave Bush a big increase of his approval, and come the 1998 re-election, George won in a landslide. Coincidentally, during the 1998 election, his younger brother Jeb Bush also decided to go the distance, and it was the only time since Nelson and Winthrop Rockefeller that two brothers were elected in different states, George running Texas and Jeb Bush controlling Florida. His opponent would be then Vice President to Bill Clinton, Al Gore.
Mr. Chairman, delegates and my fellow citizens, I proudly accept your nomination.
The race for 270 had begun.
With your help, I will take my own values of faith and family to the presidency to build an America that is not only better off, but better. And that is why today I announce that I am a candidate for President of the United States.
Bush used his small amount of political experience as Texas governor to show off how decisive he would be to make decisions, while Gore campaigned to maintain the U.S.'s strength in its economy from his predecessor. While the issues were being raised, the American public were pretty divided. Gore seemed to be the obvious pick after Clinton. Gore tried his best to distance himself from the president, following the events of the impeachment and the Monica Lewinsky scandal, asking the president not to accompany him throughout his campaign. He also saw Bush as an easy target and playing him off as not a challenge. Bush fought back, and while his critics saw him as a bumbler, along with his hothead persona which had stuck with him, the public couldn't help but be swayed by his funny antics in the debates.
To get something positive done on behalf of the people. That's what the question in this campaign is about. It's not only what's your philosophy and what's your position on issues, but can you get things done? And I believe I can. All right.
And thus came to Election Day. To say it was a close call would be an understatement.
What the networks giveth, the networks taketh away. NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column and putting it back in the too close to call column.
Throughout the night, America watched as the states rolled in for Bush and Gore, a very close battle, and then in came Florida, siding with Gore, then Bush, and then there was chaos. By the early hours of the morning, Gore had phoned Bush to concede before getting wind of the news coverage, and in a move which stunned the Republican candidate, he retracted it later. Gore demanded a recount, and the ruling of the voter fiasco was voted 4-3 by Florida's Supreme Court. The votes not correctly cast hung in the balance. Bush's team quickly worked fast to challenge and eventually delay the recount until their case was heard. On December 12th, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that a recount was not possible before its deadline on December 18th, and with a vote which caused controversy, the court ruled 5-4 that Florida's recount was not accepted and that the existing votes went in the favor of Bush. George W. Bush was declared the winner and the 43rd President of the United States 5 weeks later after the election. Bush won by a tiny margin.
On the journals of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The whole number of the electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538, of which a majority is 270. George W. Bush of the state of Texas has received for President of the United States 271 votes. Al Gore of the state of Tennessee has received 266 votes.
Gore managed 266 Electoral College votes, while Bush secured his victory with 271, 1 point over the winning number.
I'm honored. But it's not finally. This was the date it was scheduled to be certified. I mean, this is nothing unusual. But I am honored, and I guess I better go write an inaugural speech.
Bush was inaugurated on January 20th, and with a crowd of 300,000 people in attendance, he sets his goal for his first term.
Not spectators, citizens, not subjects, responsible citizens building communities of service and a nation of character. Americans are generous and strong and decent not because we believe in ourselves, but because we hold beliefs beyond ourselves. When this spirit of citizenship is missing, no government program can replace it. When this spirit is present, no wrong can stand against it. Never tiring, never yielding, never finishing, we renew that purpose today to make our country more just and generous, to affirm the dignity of our lives and every life. This work continues. The story goes on, and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm. God bless you all. And God bless America.
Every president is always set an impossible goal when stepping into the Oval Office, and that is to try and match the efforts of the first 100 days of that of FDR. Franklin D. Roosevelt's unmatched first 100 days as president is what most pundits' eyes believe is a level of leadership that will never be reached again. In the case for George W. Bush, it was tame and simple. To start, Bush completed setting up his administration quickly and under budget. Bush knew who he wanted from the get-go. His most notable choices included Dick Cheney, his VP, who was reluctant at first. After being settled down with his family and that of his health problems, he quickly joined, and it would be the second time he was under a Bush administration, having been the defense secretary for Bush's father. Also serving under his father was former Senator and Governor of Missouri, Josh Ashcroft. He was appointed as Bush's Attorney General. Donald Rumsfeld as his Secretary of Defense, previously holding the same position while under the Ford administration, and Bush's close friend Donald Evans, serving as the head of the Commerce Department. Evans had never held a political job before this, but had helped with Bush when campaigning. While people saw this as reassuring, critics saw Bush's secrecy with some of his cabinet choices as not transparent with the American people. On February 1st, George Bush created the Freedom Initiative, an act which gave people with disabilities a comprehensive program to promote participation. It increased access to assistive and universally designed technologies while also expanding education and unemployment opportunities for those under the Disability Act. During the last session in Congress, the presidential salary was raised by Bush from $200,000 in expenses to $400,000 in expenses, getting approved by Congress. It is the current rate of the presidential salary at the time of recording. In the following months, Bush was able to avoid the supposed U-turns on major issues, such as taxes, the environment, and abortion, which during the debates of last year, people in the Democratic Party assumed that he would not fulfill on. His calm presence was able to deter the party, and even his critics saw that Bush was not really a conservative on some issues than what people believed to be. Bush, being the avid Christian, wanted to expand his faith-based initiative in his policies. After succeeding in a massive $1.6 billion tax-cutting program, Bush pumped up the spending for charity groups. It also saw the reinstatement of the Mexico City policy, in not sending any U.S. medical aid to countries which were in favor of abortion. Since its inception by Ronald Reagan in 1984, Republican administrations have upheld the policy, while Democrat administrations have not. But the biggest thing to hit Bush's desk would be in August, and it would be the first true test of Bush's power.
And I believe through this research we can fully fulfill the promises of life for so many who suffer. It is important that we as a government make this decision to offer hope, to offer health, to offer healing.
And I came to the conclusion that if we want to extend life and facilitate life, then we should take these embryonic cells that are going to be discarded anyway. Because keep in mind, those who produce those cells have a right to determine what happens to them. And many of them are going to cause these to be discarded.
For those who have heard of stem cell research but don't know what it is, here's a quick rundown. Stem cell research is a scientific practice that identifies certain cells in the body for different functions. After a human is bred from a single cell, the cells multiply and become the template for certain parts of the body, such as how a red blood cell is designed to carry oxygen through the blood. The research conducted on them is to use the cell's information so that certain types of diseases can be understood and possibly even prevented, even in the development at creating new limbs and organs for replacements. This was Bush's biggest decision of his presidency at the time, in August 2001. He met with different scientists and company leaders looking for funding, and he was even sent a personal letter from Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife, who urged Bush to consider its benefits as it would help save the lives of people suffering from diseases such as Ronald Reagan himself, who since 1994 had been living with Alzheimer's. Ultimately, Bush rejected the research and in a statement gave his reasons.
Stem cells, essentially to grow another you, to be available in case you need another heart or lung or liver. I strongly oppose human cloning, as do most Americans. We recoil at the idea of growing human beings for spare body parts or creating life for our convenience. And while we must devote enormous energy to conquering disease, it is equally important that we pay attention to the moral concerns raised by the new frontier of human embryo stem cell research. Even the most noble ends do not justify any means. My position on these issues is shaped by deeply held beliefs. I'm a strong supporter of science and technology and believe they have the potential for incredible good, to improve lives, to save life, to conquer disease. I also believe human life is a sacred gift from our Creator. I worry about a culture that devalues life, and believe as your president, I have an important obligation to foster and encourage respect for life in America and throughout the world. And while we're all hopeful about the potential of this research, no one can be certain that the science will live up to the hope it has generated. 8 years ago, scientists believed fetal tissue research offered great hope for cures and treatments, yet the progress to date has not lived up to its initial expectations. Embryonic stem cell research offers both great promise and great peril, so I have decided we must proceed with great care.
Bush sat on a comfortable platform in his first 8 months. From cruising through a series of appointments to staying true with his original goals on serious issues. In a Gallup poll of that year, the majority of Americans had a good approval of Bush, with an overall 50% rating. But as previously stated, while Bush was silent on certain aspects of his job as president, there were some calls that were not looked at fondly, the last of which being the worst in hindsight. His faith-based initiative, coincided with his domestic policy, was at first delayed for 3 months after taking office, having been scrutinized by both sides of the political spectrum. In the summer months of May, June, and July, Bush was repeatedly told by high-ranking officials that the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, led by then-leader Osama bin Laden, was on the move and planning an attack on the US at some point. Bush had been in the meetings where the topic of planning a response to an attack, but Bush brushed it off, citing that he needed more evidence before drafting a plan which frustrated CIA officials. The CIA was told by Bush's officials that they had been fooled in the information received, believing that bin Laden was looking to distract the CIA from the real villain, who they claimed to be the Iraqi leader, Saddam Hussein. While the picture of Bush is painted with much broader strokes through his later years, I felt compelled to make this small documentary to show the starting outlines of the drawing of Bush. George was a calm, relaxed, and funny personality that was thrust into a position he was not ready for. But he held his head high and decided on the best position to move forward after the September 11 attacks, even if it was a detriment to the US's reputation around the world. No matter what your opinions are on the 43rd, remember he did what he thought was right. Sometimes it's what your head says, and others think with their heart. And to be in a position such as the President of the United States, sometimes those decisions can change everything.
Putting a mission accomplished on an aircraft carrier was a mistake. It sent the wrong message. We were trying to say something differently, but nevertheless it conveyed a different message. So Abu Ghraib obviously was a huge disappointment during the presidency. Not having weapons of mass destruction was a significant disappointment. I believe the phrase burdens of the office is overstated. Yes, Kelly. Why me? Oh, the burdens, Why did the financial collapse have to happen on my watch? It's just pathetic, isn't it? Self-pity. I just can't envision myself, you know, the big straw hat and a Hawaiian shirt sitting on some beach. So, particularly since I quit drinking. Anyway, President-elect Obama will find this too. He'll get in the Oval Office, and there'll be a lot of people that are real critical and harsh. And he'll be disappointed at times by the tone of the rhetoric. And he's going to have to do what he thinks is right, Jim. And if you don't, I don't see how you can live with yourself.